Urinary issues are really common in cats, actually, and most of the time it's the lower urinary tract, so especially the bladder, would be where cats most commonly have problems. And there's a variety of things that you might notice if your cat is having a lower urinary tract problem. So there could be blood in the urine, for example. You might notice that if your cat uses a litter box inside the house. Your cat might have trouble urinating, so they might spend longer in the litter box. They might be like digging around a lot more or spending a long time and yet only produce a little bit of urine. So that's not normal. Really, any change from your cat's normal habits in the litter box would be something to worry about. Sometimes cats will have increased frequency. And most cats probably urinate, I don't know, let's say 2 to 3 times a day. But if your cat suddenly is trying to urinate 4, 5, 6 times a day, then that could be also an indication that there's a problem. And then finally, some cats will urinate outside of their litter box. So they might find a place somewhere else in the house, for example, to urinate. And that can be, at least we think, that might be because if they do have a medical problem, it might be painful, it might be uncomfortable, and it just might be your cat's attempt to try to find maybe some other place won't cause me so much discomfort. Maybe the litter box is the reason why it hurts when I go and urinate. So that's what we think anyway. So sometimes urinating outside of the litter box. So those are all common problems of lower urinary tract problems in cats. Crystals in cat urine are an interesting topic because sometimes it's actually normal. There are a lot of cats that have a few crystals in their urine or have a few crystals some of the time in their urine, and it's perfectly normal. So crystals just by themselves are not necessarily a bad thing, but if there's too many of them, then it does indicate that there could be a problem. And so we do want to be thinking about how do we prevent crystals from building up in the urine, because they could lead to an obstruction of the urinary tract. So this particularly happens in male cats. So for example, male cats have a very small tube leading from the bladder to outside of the body. It's called the urethra, and it's really, really narrow. And if they get too many crystals in their urine, those crystals can definitely clog up that little narrow tube, and they'll get a urinary blockage. So it really is important that we think about how do we prevent a lot of crystals forming in the bladder of cats. And the number one way to do that is to have an appropriate food. So there's, as we all know, there's a wide variety of foods on the market for cats. And some of them are much better than others in terms of promoting urinary tract health. So we do want to look for a food that is known to, that has talks about urinary tract health in cats. That's probably the best way, a good quality food. So important for cats in general, but really important for urinary tract health. That would be the number one way to make sure cats don't get too many crystals in their urine and then run into problems. Well, I can't tell you how many times I have heard cat owners ask me if their cat is urinating outside the litter box, maybe around the house, because the cat is angry or spiteful or upset. And so I guess that in simple terms, cats are not, they might seem like it, but they're not that spiteful a creature. I think that's a really human emotion. I think we have to be careful that we don't try to give our human emotions to our cats. And spite is an interesting emotion because if you think about it, when you act spitefully towards somebody else, it really does you no good. It certainly doesn't do you any long-term good. And it doesn't do the recipient any good either. So it's kind of a useless emotion. And I mention that because cats and dogs and most animals have evolved biologically to have fairly useful behaviors, not useless behaviors. So we really don't want to ascribe feelings of jealousy or anger or spitefulness when the cat is not using the litter box. So rather, it's either a medical problem or there is some stress-related problem. Cats, especially young and middle-aged cats, get a stress-related disease called idiopathic cystitis. And it can come from different stressors, different things that are going on in their home, and it just happens to target the bladder. It makes their bladder really painful. And one of the signs of that is urinating outside the litter box. So we would never want to make the mistake and say, oh, it's just spite or it's just jealousy, when our poor kitty is actually in pain and needs to get a diagnosis and needs some help. So always remember, it's not about emotions. It's more about there's something wrong and we have to figure out why Kitty's not using the litter box.